Joining us on the line is George Farmer. He is CEO of Parler, technology and private equity investor, and was a major supporter of the Brexit campaign. He's been involved in both American and British politics for the last 4 years. He, of course, is also married to our own Candace Owens here at Daily Wire. George, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
No worries, Ben. Good to be with you.
So for those of us who are not British, why don't you explain what it feels like as a Brit on the day after the death of Queen Elizabeth II?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hugely emotional moment, I guess, a huge emotional day yesterday. It's difficult to describe. I was trying to find a comparable analogy for the US market, I guess. It's almost as if, some beloved mother figure of the nation has passed away. I mean, that's really what it feels like. She was queen when President Truman was around. I think that's a good perspective for Americans to take, just in terms of historical legacy. Her first prime minister was Churchill. This is a woman who was queen when my mother was born. She was queen when I was born. She was queen when my children were born. She's been a constant theme of the nation of Britain since I can remember, since really anyone in my parents' generation can remember. It's a hugely moving and emotional day. And it was such a sad day in many ways, because she represented that thing which society has now forgotten, which is duty. We talk so much about rights in our current society, but we forget about the right hand to the left hand. The right hand is duty and the left hand is rights. We cannot have one without the other. And she represented the best in terms of virtue and duty. So it's an incredibly emotional day, I think, for Britons around the world, but also for the Commonwealth as well. And I think it's going to take some time to mourn her passing.
So, George, I think one of the things that this reminds Americans of is the fact that in Britain, history is taken incredibly seriously. Obviously, Elizabeth II didn't have any actual political power in Britain. She was more of a symbolic figure, but symbolism matters an awful lot in Britain. And she was a constant reminder, both in sort of her symbology, but also in her person, because she spoke about history a lot of what Britain brought to the world. And it seems like a lot of the rage at her upon her death is specifically based on that. There's this sort of left-wing notion that the British Empire was net a horrible thing for the world, that all Britain represents on the global stage is exploitation, colonialism, and cruelty. Yeah.
I mean, I've read some of the critics of her reign. I mean, there's a fundamental misconception of history, I think, amongst most of her critics. Yes, I mean, of course, the Queen has absolutely no political power, and the monarchy in Britain has had really no power since Charles I got his head chopped off, in the English Civil War, which was in the 17th century. So history is taken very seriously. The monarch has no power, but the monarchy represents a constant, and that's something that I think I've appreciated more as I come over to the US and move my life over here, is that the hyperpartisanship which one sees in America, for example, obviously when Trump was president, you saw this aggressive hyperpartisanship. In Britain, we had the same kind of fight. We had the same Brexit-based fight, which Trump ignited in the US. It was the same kind of argument, progressives versus conservatives. But the monarchy remains a constant, and that's actually something which can bring the nation together. And that's not appreciated by her critics, or wasn't appreciated by her critics. It's a theme which runs through the heart of the nation. People come together, they find solace in something which is beyond the political realm. She was not a colonizer. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the British Empire as a whole, of course, it had its faults, but on the whole, it was a force for good throughout the world. I mean, I think most people would say that the advancement of justice, the advancement of virtue, the advancement of law and civil society is a good thing. And that's predominantly what the British Empire advanced throughout the world during its tenure. And of course, she oversaw the dismantling of that in the post-Second World War era, which was part of the agreement really with America becoming the superpower, was that Britain would dismantle its empire. And of course, that started with the Suez Crisis in 1952. So you've got this period that she oversaw, and she did it graciously as well, which I think is also underappreciated. So her reign was benign and oversaw this period of managed decline in Britain's imperial status, and she became the figurehead of a new Britain.
George, one of the things that I think is so stunning about her as a personality is obviously, you look at her history, she's giving speeches at 21 talking about how she's devoting herself to the nation. I can't think of many 21-year-olds now who devote themselves to pretty much anything of importance. You're not considered an adult in the West until you hit about 35 now. But she's 21 years old and she's taking that upon herself. She's 25 when she assumes the actual monarchy. And then she proceeds to sort of revitalize the British idea of the stiff upper lip, the idea of courage in the face of adversity, the idea that Britain can weather all sorts of problems ranging from the attempted socialism of the 1960s and 70s through the COVID crisis. And I'm not sure that her like is going to be seen again. It seems like the British royal family has now morphed into the Charles and Diana age, and the Meghan Markle and Prince Harry age. I mean, I wonder what you think that King Charles III is going to be like, considering that he's been very politically active in a way that Elizabeth really was never active.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I mean, we all kind of wait to see what this is going to look like. I think that I'm not speaking out of turn, and certainly not speaking on behalf of a minority of Britons when I say that people are definitely concerned by the future reign of Charles III. I think, the Queen exemplified in many ways the perfect monarch because she was non-political and she never put her feet into the political realm. She represented soft monarchical power, which was, mere disapproval of something would often elicit a conversation about it. Whereas Charles is a bit more rambunctious. He tends to stick his feet into things quite aggressively on a pretty consistent basis. And certainly, of course, what you've seen with Harry and Meghan is Harry and Meghan are not liked in the UK. I don't think that's a secret. They're genuinely disliked, I would say, quite aggressively. I think in many ways it will be William and Kate who take up the mantle, if anyone can, of Queen Elizabeth II in terms of continuing her sort of symbolism and soft power and quiet disposition. William seems to have the same quiet disposition, which is good. And I think we're all looking forward to those days ahead of us. I think the next few years are going to be quite turbulent in some ways.
Yeah, George, I think one of the things that people, don't remember all that well, if you're my age, you don't remember it that well. I was only 13 when Princess Diana died, and so I don't really remember a lot of the turmoil surrounding Charles and Diana and the current Queen Consort, Camilla. The way that the Queen presided over all of that really was pretty incredible, considering that her entire life was dedicated to the service of the British Empire. And because of that, she always saw the idea of family issues as being somehow separate from her duty as anathema, and that the family was the issue. And so when all of a sudden, all of this sort of tabloidy stuff was breaking into the newspapers, when Diana was doing interviews with Martin Bashir talking about how there were 3 people in her marriage, when there were biographies of Princess Diana coming out in 1991 talking about how Prince Charles was cheating on her, and of course neglecting the fact that Diana was having some side affairs of her own. All of that stuff must have come as just a genuine shock to Elizabeth II. She treated it that way, but she was able to soldier through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of incredible when you think about it. I mean, if any other person was placed into the context of having to say nothing about their personal family life in the public realm, when their personal family life is so on display as hers was, the navigation of choppy waters is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, we all have families, we all have family issues, parents, sisters, brothers, people die, and they also, they make mistakes. She has never been able to say publicly how she feels about anything. I mean, this is something that the royal family have tried to keep as a private matter. And of course, it's a public matter because they are the royal family. She navigated some incredibly choppy waters during the 90s with Princess Diana's death, of course, at the time. And of course, many other times during her reign. This was a reign which spanned 70 years. She saw the miners' strike of the 80s. She saw, as you rightly mentioned, the rise of socialism in Britain in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Incredibly dark days in the 70s when Britain was rolling with 3-day weeks. And she also saw the dismantling of the empire, the restoration of independence to many of the colonies. An incredibly fortuitous position to be in many ways, but also an incredibly difficult one to navigate, both personally and politically. And of course, those days in 1997 when Princess Diana died, I remember them very vividly. They were some of the hardest days, I think, of her reign. Many people acknowledge that. And of course, the family got through it. But at the time, it was very, very difficult. It was difficult for the nation, but it was also difficult for her. And on a personal and a raw level.
How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.